Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, 'Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames.' But Abraham said, 'Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us.' He said, 'Well then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment.' Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them.' He said, 'No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent.' He said to him, 'If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Hallelujah. Have you ever been channel surfing and landed upon a channel doing an infomercial for some worldwide relief agency, showing scenes of hungry, starving people somewhere in the world? I don't know about you, but when that happens to me, I usually can't watch for long. A knot in my stomach tightens, and so I hit the channel button on the remote to find something much more appealing to watch. The scene that Jesus paints in this story for us today is likewise difficult to stomach. Lazarus is not only hungry, wanting what falls from the rich man's table, but he's covered with sores which the dogs come and lick. Yuck. Well, this morning we can't change the channel. Jesus tells stories like this one for good reason. They're meant to open our eyes to those who are suffering around us. He tells stories like this for us to reflect on how we live out our lives. He tells stories like this to change us. This story of the rich man and Lazarus is unique. It's only found in Luke's gospel. And certain subtleties in the way that Jesus tells this story can open our eyes to seeing those who are in need in some new ways. I imagine if you're like me, you listen to this story from the perspective of being rich. Now, I don't believe that Jesus told this story to make anyone feel guilty about their riches and their wealth, but it does have much to teach those of us who are even just a little bit rich about how God desires us to live. Well, right away, I think there's a slight danger in getting sucked into thinking that this story just is revealing what heaven and hell are like in the afterlife. And the danger here is we might miss the main point entirely. For many Christians even still think that the goal of our Christian faith is about going to heaven instead of hell when you die. But actually, there's really no mention of hell in this story. Hades was the Greek god of the underworld, which might be a clue for us not to take this story as a depiction of what will happen in the afterlife. And like many Greek myths, this story is meant to teach us about how to live our lives right now. The rich man's sin was not in being rich, but rather in his being blind to the plight of the poor man at his very gate. And even after the reversal of fortunes that happens in the afterlife, he remains blinded to his own sense of entitlement. Did you notice he never speaks directly to Lazarus, but keeps asking Abraham to send Lazarus on errands for him? Oh, have Lazarus come and cool my tongue, or go and tell my brothers. He remains blind to his own sense of privilege. Just as many of us, maybe our blinders are starting to get taken off, but many of us who are white, I know for most of my life, I've remained blind to the ways that white privilege benefit me in this society and culture. And when we see how blind this rich man was to Lazarus starving at his gate, and how he remains blind still even in the afterlife, we may begin to wonder about the extent of our own blindness. So maybe today, by reflecting on this story, Jesus will begin to remove more of our blinders and teach us to see ourselves and others in new ways. Did you happen to notice that the rich man wasn't named in this story, but the poor man was? And in our Tuesday Bible study, somebody said, well, wait a second, in the song that the choir is singing today, Dives is mentioned as the name of the rich man. But Dives comes from the Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible that Jerome did in the 4th century. It's not his name. Dives is the Latin word for rich man. And note how Jesus inserts a reversal of dignity and worth into these two characters. For we usually think of the rich as being somebodies, and we treat them with respect and honor, while the destitute are treated oftentimes with scorn and judgment. But Jesus reverses that. The unnamed rich man is no one in particular, just rich, while Lazarus is named. Knowing someone's name is an important step in developing a relationship with them. Knowing someone's name makes them a somebody. And when he dies, Lazarus gets carried by angels to be by Abraham's side. When the rich man dies, he just dies and is buried. And then he ends up in torment in that place named Hades. This week, Reverend William Barber III and other leaders of the Poor People's Campaign attended a congressional briefing to help our elected legislators to see the poor people in our country as somebodies that need things like a living wage so that they too might live more abundant lives. Do we see the poor, the sick, the suffering around us as somebodies? As Pastor Steve Garnaas-Holmes says, the poor, the abandoned, the nameless, they are somebody. The guy at the intersection with the ragged cardboard sign, the refugee with everything in a plastic bag, the old woman in the wheelchair at the nursing home, the addict wasting away in an upstairs room, the inmate languishing in prison. They have a name, a story. They're somebody. And in parentheses, Pastor Steve adds, So is the rich man, but he has forfeited his identity for his riches. They're not fixtures, objects, symbols of something. They're somebody. Look at them and see. See them. Maybe you can help them, maybe not. But you can see them. This gospel story helps me to see the somebodies that I might otherwise ignore. It encourages me to see those who bear life's burden of financial struggle as somebodies. It opens my eyes to the societal forces like white supremacy and all the extraction economies that result in the suffering of the poor, even in some of the richest nations in the world, like ours. Did you also happen to notice how Abraham reminds the rich man that he had received his good things in life? They weren't earned or deserved, they were received. And likewise, Lazarus' lot in life wasn't deserved. He was a victim of his circumstances. In his misfortune, he received hunger and illness right at the gate of one who could have provided health care and food. This story casts God's vision for our world as being a place of health and abundance for all. How might Lazarus' fate have been different if he had been seen with compassionate eyes? Who might we have trouble seeing that's lying right at the very gates of our lives? I recall seeing blinders being removed from people's eyes when they work side by side with Habitat for Humanity partner families to help them build an affordable home to purchase. It's eye-opening when someone does the math and realizes how a 40-hour-a-week minimum wage paycheck won't go nearly far enough to meet a very reasonable budget. Will our eyes be open today? The late Fred Craddock, who taught preaching at a seminary in Oklahoma, tells of the time when there was a very wealthy potential donor that wanted to give the seminary a large gift specifically for the preaching department. And since Fred taught preaching, the president asked him to go along on this visit. And the cultivation visit went well. A few weeks later, the president came and told him that the fellow was ready to make the gift and would he accompany him again to receive the money. And the president anticipated this gift to be several $million. When they got to the man's office, he was all ready for him. He suggested that they pray first, and that man himself offered a prayer. He then opened his checkbook and got out his pen and looked at them and asked, now all of this is going to go towards the preaching department, right? And they both assured him that it would. And then he said, well, none of it's going to go towards blacks or women. And at that, the president of the seminary said, well, I'm sorry, but under those conditions, we cannot accept your gift. And then they stood up and walked away empty-handed. I wonder if that rich man ever saw his own blindness in a situation like that. And how might we too so often be blind to our own blindness? Who might cross our path this week to help us see, or at least open our eyes a little bit further? Who is it that might be just lying there at the gate of our lives? This parable seems to deliver a harsh outcome to that unnamed rich man. But there's one particular word spoken to him by Abraham that gives me some hope for him and for all who are rich. After his request for Abraham to send Lazarus to get some water to cool his tongue, Abraham responds, did you catch it? By calling him a child. Perhaps you recall Jesus saying that we all must become like children to enter God's kingdom. Being rich, even being rich, doesn't negate his being a child of God. And then perhaps there's also a small sign of change already germinating within him as he doesn't wish his brothers to undergo his same fate. Maybe he's finally beginning to see the great chasm that exists between the rich and the poor. Perhaps today we can open our eyes a little wider to see that chasm as well. And then ask, what can we do to help close that gap? The name Lazarus means God helps. and God's help comes through us. So may this story of Lazarus and the rich man open our eyes anew to the systemic sources of poverty and how we often participate in those systems. May it open our eyes to see those caught in the cycle of poverty as somebodies. May it move us to envision new and creative ways that we can participate in God's mission of repair and change, participate in God's ways of justice. We can't change the channel on the rich man and Lazarus story, but we can let it change us. It can change how we see others. It can change how we treat others. It can change how we live in this world as God's beloved children and stewards of the abundance that we have received. So guide us, O God, in discovering the ways of life that really are life, bridging this chasm between rich and poor. For none of us, not even billionaires, will be truly rich until there is abundant life for all. Amen.